You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
You're watching West Hartford Community Television.
For the community, by the community.
Celestial greetings. I'm Janet Booth, a professional astrologer from West Hartford, Connecticut, and welcome to my program on astrology called Looking Up. Lately, I've been on an alliteration kick. Most of you know alliteration is that word that means when several words, or at least two, start with the same letter. So in September, we had Shaky September. And I guess October was not an alliteration, it was Rocktober. Well, I'm back to alliteration now with Noteworthy November. I almost entitled this program November, Naughty or Nice? Because I think it's probably going to be some of each, but we will see what appears to be noteworthy in this November. So, yes, I see, I almost called it the three S's, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Saturn. Every November, the month starts off with the sun passing through Scorpio. That usually starts in October around the 22nd and goes to around the 22nd of November. Then the sun moves into Sagittarius. So that's the normal pattern year after year. What makes it rather noteworthy this year, and even actually the last few years, going through the November signs of first Scorpio and now Sagittarius, is the slowish planet Saturn. Saturn takes about 29 to 30 years to go around the whole circuit of the zodiac, spending about 2.5 years in each sign. And it's not always an exact 2.5, and many times it does this. It makes a foray into the next sign, then it retreats back into the prior sign, then comes into the next sign and stays there for a while. And sometimes at the end of that, it may back and forth as it's changing to the next sign, and sometimes this crosses the lines of years, so that's not always a lineup. But we had a couple or more years of Saturn going through Scorpio, and now we're going to have a couple of, at least, with it going through Sagittarius. So I want to outline a little bit about what those two signs are like and contrast them somewhat. Scorpio is a water sign, which means it's very emotion-based. And it's also in the category of what we call a fixed sign, which means very stable. Or you might even think of, remember from physics class, inertia, the tendency of a body in motion to stay in motion, like how a truck has trouble stopping because of its momentum. Inertia also means the body at rest stays at rest. So there's a bit of a couch potato-ishness that sometimes comes with the fixed signs, and especially with Taurus, the sign opposite Scorpio, because that's most sort of interested in indulgent creature comfort, so they love that couch. But the water signs I think of when I mix them with whether they're cardinal, which is active, fixed, which is stable, or mutable, which means adaptable, I make an association in my mind and I say, well, cardinal water is water in motion. It's kind of like the ocean or a river. And mutable water might even be water that's all over the place. So it's like a sprinkler system, perhaps. Well, fixed water is much more like the still lake. But I usually make the analogy with Scorpio is that, yes, it's like the Loch Ness, beautiful on the surface, but maybe there's a monster underneath. Now, this does not mean that Scorpio people are a monster underneath. What it means is that there's a lot churning down underneath the surface with a Scorpio. And they want to show you that placid front, and they don't want you to see into their private business. They're excellent at holding confidences for themselves or for others. And consequently, many times Scorpio people are in positions where they have to deal with a lot of confidential information. Now, this is the sign that has to do with shared money matters, or where your money mixes with other people's money. So we would say that could be insurance, taxes, investments, inheritance, even joint finances in a business or in a marriage. And we find when that planet Saturn moved through Scorpio, which Saturn is a stabilizing influence, it is about getting things squared away, getting your act together, putting things in order. So a lot of people wanted to kind of get their financial situation straightened out. And near the end of Saturn going through Scorpio, we did see volatility starting in the market. That was kind of, I guess, in August or so. It started getting a little crazy. And that's one of the reasons I was talking about shaky September. So it was midway through September on the 17th when Saturn changed signs from Scorpio into Sagittarius. But as I mentioned with that sort of back and forth before, which is related to a phenomenon in astrology called retrograde motion. And retrograde is from Latin for backward step. So we might think in terms of, remember that game we played when we were kids? Was it Giant Steps? Where you take a couple steps forward, you take some steps backwards, that kind of thing. So the planets are actually always hurtling forward through space, but because we're on a planet that's also moving forward through space, because of relative speeds, when we pass a slower planet or when a faster planet passes us, if we measure it over the course of weeks against a backdrop of the stars that don't move, the fixed stars, we would notice that these planets tend to go to a certain degree, stop, back up, at another degree they stop, they go forward again. So that's what we get with the zigzag motion of retrograde. So we did have Saturn enter into Sagittarius, and that was in 2014, the very end, on the 23rd of December, and it stayed there till 14th of June, went back into Scorpio. Then 9/17 of 2015, all the way up to December 19th of 2017, so more than 2 years, that's how long it's going to be in Sagittarius. Now Sagittarius is one of these mutable signs, adaptable. So we're going to go from kind of like stubbornness and standing our ground about things that Saturn is related to, which might be how we have things organized or what rules we live by. You know, we might have been very attached to what we think are the shoulds in life and the rights and wrongs during that Saturn through Scorpio. Now that it comes into Sagittarius, we're a lot more flexible. So we might say, well, I believe in the spirit of the law, but maybe I don't quite always follow the letter of the law. That's pretty big with Saturn and Sagittarius. And even when we talk about year after year, when the sun is in Scorpio versus the sun in Sagittarius, the sun sign from month to month kind of gives a general overall atmosphere that the rest of the astrological happenings are, you know, sort of, that's in the background of them, we might say. So the Sagittarius time, it's a fire sign. There's a lot of enthusiasm. There's a lot of optimism and excitement. And sometimes we're like all over the place with that. We don't really concentrate it well. And you've heard perhaps the term too many irons in the fire. I think that must come from back in the days when they were blacksmiths. And maybe if you left some of the iron you were going to hammer out in the fire too long, you might ruin it. So if you had too many in there, it was disturbing to how you were going to proceed with your work. Or we might also say the phrase, the eyes are bigger than the stomach, or too much on your plate. You know, you go to a buffet, it's like all you can eat. And the next thing you know, you got this, you know, the plate's loaded up like this. And you maybe can't eat all of that, but it all looks so good when you were going by. So this is kind of what the Sagittarius energy is usually like. Now we bring in this influence of Saturn, which is a concentrator, which kind of puts things within limits and almost like funnels that energy so that instead of being all over the place, we have the ability to really kind of measure our actions and make our checklists and do things one thing at a time instead of multitasking all over the place. So, in a way, I'm kind of excited that Saturn is coming into or is in Sagittarius because it may help us keep from, wavering a lot. Now, that said, I'll now contradict myself because we have two other major slow planets. Well, one's kind of slow and one's really slow, going through other mutable signs right now. And that would be the ruler of Sagittarius, the planet most associated with that, which is Jupiter, and that's going through Virgo. And we haven't talked a lot about that, but Jupiter, the biggest planet, it expands everything that it is in contact with astrologically. And so it's adding to our desire to take care of all the little details. Virgo really is the sign of the details and the little pieces that make up the bigger puzzle. Well, Jupiter usually likes to look at the big pieces. It likes to look at the forest. It's not happy when it has to pay attention to every single little tree. So this kind of becomes a conflict because there are times in which Saturn and Jupiter will be at 90-degree angle to each other called a square. And that's usually a time when we kind of have to go around a corner or we feel like things are at cross purposes. And we've already experienced, I think, one of those. I'm going to come to that a little later on and more to come in the spring. The other factor that's slower than Jupiter or Saturn is Neptune. Neptune takes, I think it's 165 years to go around all of the signs of the zodiac, where Jupiter does it in 12. So Neptune spends about a whole Jupiter orbit, about 12 years or so on average, in one sign. And in 2012, it went into the home sign that it rules of Pisces, which is like the ultimate mutable sign. It's water, which is already kind of flowing and can go anywhere, and mutable. So emotions all over the place. So Neptune going through Pisces, it heightens our sensitivities. It amps up our psychic abilities. Your third eye is working overtime now. And some people who aren't ordinarily what they might think of as psychic are having dreams that have meaning to them, or they're seeing signs in things. If you have any planet in your chart in one of those four mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, when Neptune gets to the right degree, it's going to have at you. And you may even feel for a while like you're kind of like drunk without being drunk, or almost like drugged without doing drugs, a little spacey, and not really of this world, or feet not grounded. And actually, Pisces and Neptune rule the feet. So a good thing to do when you're not feeling grounded is to make contact with the ground. Go for a walk, or even just stand. If you know yoga, you can just stand in mountain pose, which is where you kind of have your feet about shoulder length apart and your hands, almost by your side, but just in a very stabilizing position where you focus on your core. But I divert, and that's something that happens a lot. We get sidetracked with any of these mutable signs being emphasized, and there will be times when the Saturn and Neptune will be in a 90 degrees, or the Saturn and Jupiter will be in a 90 degrees, and I think we even have one time coming up in the spring maybe where there's Saturn, Jupiter, Neptune, all in a big thing we call a T-square. Well, we'll worry about that more next year than this year. But I just want you to get the idea of, in this November period, you may feel a bit of a shift when we go from Scorpio into Sagittarius, from something that seems more stable and solid, even though it's a water sign, but has some kind of core to it, to more sort of all over the place. And for those of you who have the Janet's Planets astrological calendar that I put out every year, this is a great place to check to learn more about what any of these planets and the signs mean, and it tells what period of time they're going to be there and that kind of thing. So We have coming up, before we get into the real Sagittarius part of the month, a new moon on 11/11, Veterans Day. And that's going to be a pretty good new moon. The sun and moon are at 19 degrees of Scorpio. And this is in a period of 6 months or so where all the new moons are at 19 degrees of whatever sign the sun is going through. So we have the October new moon on October 12th was 19 of Libra. Then this one on 11/11, 19 Scorpio. Then on 12/11 we'll have 19 Sag, and so on. So if you have your chart and you look in that and you see anything, any sign, whatever, that's at 19 degrees, that's going to be getting an influx of new energy month after month until next spring. So it's begging you to do something new in your life in whatever area that planet is located in your chart and what it represents. And you might do that new thing for a matter of months over the course of this period, or any one of those months. And you may have already started it. How exciting. So at this particular new moon, the sun and moon together, which is what a new moon means, they're at the same degree, they're in a nice third of the sky, which is considered very favorable and smooth, with this asteroid called Chiron, whose nickname is the Wounded Healer. And it has to do with exposing what our weak links are and then helping us repair and shore those up. So that would say that the 4 weeks that starts at 11/11 is a really good time for us to be working on issues related to improvement and repair in our lives. And maybe that's on an emotional level, because these are both in the water emotional signs. And it might also have to do with something about sharing and generosity and helping others, because maybe you're not so much the wounded one that needs healing. Maybe you're in a strong place and you can be a healing force for somebody else. And Scorpio, I even call the sign of making a difference. It's a sign about transformation and turning the page and starting a new chapter. So maybe you want to start a new chapter in your life that's healthier for you. That's always a good idea at this time of year. There's also a particular pattern in place at this new moon, which will also kind of reverberate for those 4 weeks following. And it's called a finger of God. And sometimes we wonder which finger it is that we might be experiencing. But it's the pointer finger. But it's pointing us a little somewhere other than where we think we were going. And so I call this pattern the divine detour. And it is comprised of the sun and moon at that degree together. And they're 2 signs away, which is a helpful connection called sextile, with this Jupiter. Jupiter wants to kind of open things up. And they're both 5 signs away from different directions to the planet Uranus. Well, Uranus is the planet of surprise and shock and crazy things coming out of the blue and the unexpected. So we see Jupiter as the expansion planet, and it's related to luck and fortuitous circumstances. So when they blend nicely together, and this is sort of on the nice side, and when it gets into this pattern, it makes it even nicer, but it means lucky surprises. So what I would say is, you have your goal, you think you're going here, but some things intervene, and it takes you a little bit over in a different direction, or a little bit more in another direction. But when you get over to where it lands you, you go, oh, this is good, this is good. So we're looking for this finger of God to point us to some nice things for mid-November into mid-December. And Jupiter has a lot to do with intelligence. It's in Virgo, which is also a very mentally oriented sign, again, liking to pay attention to those details, and Jupiter rules higher education. And Uranus is said to be the higher octave of Mercury. Mercury is normal consciousness, and Uranus is sort of like super consciousness. So together we get this idea of sort of brainy ingenuity, is one of the words I used in Janet's Planets. So what you would want to do is say, oh, maybe I can kind of put sun and moon, that's sort of heart and soul, into something that's smart and going to spark me in some new ways to do something healthy for myself. Now, one thing I would kind of caution you a little bit about, Jupiter is not too far off from being across from Chiron. And if we said Chiron was the weak link, and Jupiter, similar to when I was talking about Sagittarius, can mean the overloaded plate, you want to be careful not to try to do too much, or it's going to be very difficult for you to accomplish all the things that you put on your to-do list. Okay, so then, while we're still in the good part of November, we have another lovely little triangle that the Sun gets into with Uranus. And they both have a sort of creative component to them. Well, one of the connections that the Sun was making to Uranus in that finger of God was 150 degrees apart. And that one's usually considered kind of a mismatch. They don't exactly see eye to eye. The Sun doesn't have to move far before it's 144 degrees away from Uranus, getting a little bit closer. 144 is 2/5 of the sky apart and is something called a biquintile, and it's generally considered sort of talent or luck. So we have that going, and then they combine nicely with this dwarf planet called Ceres, spelled C-E-R-E-S. It's the same root word as cereal, and it's named for the goddess of harvest and fertility. So you think in terms of kind of great mother energy and nurturing and support, as well as literal nurturance, and kind of like, how does your garden grow? It's going to grow with unusual creativity. And we might also say, or I think I did say in Janet's planets, unusual ways of showing support work to advantage. Intelligence combines with bravado to help us take smart risks. Because Uranus likes to take risks, and it's in Aries, which can be very impulsive. So we have this very nice triangle. Actually, Ceres and Uranus are kind of in this 144 degrees apart. No, 72, 1/5. And then the Sun moves into position, let's see, Ceres Uranus on 11/17. But when the real action that we're going to feel it is, the Sun makes the triangle on the 15th of November, Mercury makes the triangle on the 16th of November. So that 15th, 16th, really juicy. But when I looked again in Janet's planets, it has a section called Best Worst Days for different activities. And there was the 16th, and it said actually in the afternoon and into the evening of the 16th is one of the best times of the month of November and one of the better times of the year of 2015 for initiating activities that might have to do with anything in the communications field, which is Mercury's area, and also the Sun, creative things, things that bring out your power, bring out your personal individual talents, and things that might be related to Moon, which could be home, family, real estate, property, things like that. So if you need to be putting a bid on a house, or putting your house on the market, or hiring a decorator, or perhaps even purchasing some significant home appliances or furnishings, those would be good on the afternoon or the evening of the 16th of November. The evening is also very good for Saturn. And I'm trying to remember if that's a Sunday or what day of the week that is. Monday on the 16th. Good, so it's a business day. Saturn is also favorable in the evening. So things about starting a business, forming a business partnership, shaking hands on a deal, things like that, all very good then. And I'd love to see you do something nice with that magic triangle in place. And because also that's one of, like I say, the good times. And then, like by 10 days later, we're into the not so nice part of November, into the naughty part of November. And well, what do I mean about naughty? Well, we talked about the Saturn in Sagittarius. And if you have anything in those signs that I was talking about, the four mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sag, or Pisces, it's going to be, I shouldn't say come gunning for that planet. It's going to be setting up some tests for you. That's what Saturn is famous for. It's kind of like, I usually call it the hardest teacher we ever had. And we, moaned and complained all through the course. But when we got done, we go, I learn more from that teacher than I did from any other. So the tests are coming, and Saturn's not all mean. You know, it will punish us if we've been misbehaving, but it will also reward us if we have been doing our hard work, because Saturn wants us to work hard. So now it turns out that its best position is if it's at the top of the chart, and that only happens if you're born with the sign of Pisces as the rising sign, and that's a certain time of day depending on the year, etc., etc. So I always want people to find out your birth time, find out what your rising sign is. But if you're Pisces rising, you've got Neptune going through that. That's your ruler, and it's going to make the square with Saturn. So it's this time around for Saturn going through your 10th house. Maybe it was better 29 years ago. Maybe it'll be better 29 years from now, because that's the Saturn cycle, 29 years. But this particular passage of Saturn through the top of your chart, it's going to come at a time where you personally are feeling like maybe less grounded, spacier, tiring more easily. The challenge is to see how can you take your visions, your dreams, and this is true for any of us actually, and put them into manifestation, because Neptune's the dream planet, Saturn is the reality planet. We usually say in astrology, the further out the planet and the slower it goes around the zodiac, the more weight it wields. So that would mean Neptune is the stronger force than Saturn. Saturn is trying to put form onto Neptune's nebulousness, at the same time that Neptune is trying to wash out all of the organization and planning that Saturn's trying to do. So it kind of says, make your plans, but make sure there's a lot of leeway in those plans, because even with Saturn in Sagittarius, when it's not in the square to Neptune and Pisces, we still want to have a lot of flexibility going on. So we've just had 3-4 years of a difficult square between Uranus and Pluto. You've seen me talk about that. Now we think, oh, we're coming out of the woods of that. I'm like, oh, good. So what do we have? We got this Saturn-Neptune, and it is exact on the 26th of November, which I think is the day after Thanksgiving, or is that on Thanksgiving? That's Thanksgiving. Oh, thanks a lot, planets. And it doesn't just come to us bare naked. It comes packaged with a little triangle of tough connections to this new dwarf planet out past Pluto, which is the one that threw the astronomers into a tizzy when they discovered it, and they had to redefine what a planet was and downgrade Pluto and all that. Remember that? So this one called Eris, she's kind of a rabble-rouser, troublemaker, and specializes in chaos and discord. So when we see how things are having trouble to be clear and manifest, and then we get this discord with it, not so nice around Thanksgiving. Travel not going to be easy, because Saturn's in Sagittarius, sign of long-distance travel. Then we've got right around day after Thanksgiving, Saturday, the Saturday, Venus adds into that triangle. It's a money planet, it's a relationship planet. So when you're thinking in terms of Black Friday and big sales, I want you to think really twice or 3 times. Be careful about what you're buying then. Really know what you're up to. Check your credit cards. You know, make sure if you're online shopping it's safe, or it's just a little bit of a precarious time right then. And even for relationships, we're all around our family at Thanksgiving. Be careful about guilt tripping and projection, and try to, you know, get your sympathy out and be empathetic with your loved ones. And I would say this, the stock market might be very volatile on that day after Thanksgiving, and thankfully it's only open till 1 o'clock. So we have kind of the naughty time comes near the end of November. So we're going to see sort of a noteworthy, sometimes nice, sometimes naughty month, but I want you to make the best of it for you, and we'll talk again soon on Looking Up.